Hey everybody, what's happening? Happy Tuesday evening. My name's Matt Ham, for those of you who hadn't had a chance to connect. Out of Wilmington, North Carolina, and I don't normally do live videos in the evening, but tonight I was just studying and some things kind of hit me that I've been walking through, so I wanted to walk through this with you guys as well, and I hope that it encourages you kind of where you are. You know, I am, some context, a father to four, husband, a small business owner. I am walking into a season of stepping into a call to evangelize and teach, kind of this bridge between faith and business and how we can kind of apply the two together. So anyway, that's what we do. I have an organization co-founded called Uprint. It's a faith development organization. We have resources, one-to-one mentoring. We do corporate speaking and things like that, and that's my heart and soul, what I love to do. So I wanted to talk tonight about a story from the Old Testament, and that is Jacob wrestling with God. It's a familiar passage, kind of set it up. The Israelites, the Jewish people, they had their forefathers, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. If you know the story as presented in the Bible, God comes to Abraham and promises to make a nation of him. He doesn't have a son until he's 100. That son is Isaac. Isaac has a son, Jacob, and then Jacob has 12 sons, which become the 12 tribes of Israel, on down, King David, the lineage, all the way to Jesus. So this is a huge part of the Jewish faith, a huge part of the Christian faith, and this is a story that really highlights something I think that we all can really learn from, and that's what I want to share with you guys tonight. So to paint the picture, you have this character, Jacob. Now Jacob, what you need to know, is kind of a schemer. He's the supplanter is what Jacob means, and there's a story when he's born that he actually grabbed the heel of his twin brother when they were being born. So he's kind of, his whole life he's like fighting with his twin brother. He's fighting for the blessing of his father, to the point where he actually you know, kind of fools his father into giving him the blessing. He betrays his brother. Then he leaves his family, and he's wrestling with this man named Laban for his daughters. And so his whole life is just kind of wrecked by this being this really kind of this shrewd guy, and he's wrestling for this blessing, and he's wrestling with people, and he's fighting with people to get what it is that he most longs for, and that is his identity, who he is, love, those things in our life that we truly want. We don't talk about all the time: love, identity, peace, freedom. Jacob is wrestling for this under his own strength. And he has this experience, this encounter that radically transforms him. And I think it's something that we all need to experience at some point in our life. And so this is found in Genesis 32, chapter 32, verse 22. And to set this up, Jacob has betrayed his brother Esau. His brother is pursuing him. He's fearful that he's going to die at the hand of his brother. So he divides his belongings, his camp, you know, his estate, if you will, so that he's kind of trying to leverage his safety and the survival of his family. And he sends his family ahead of him, and he's alone. And there he wrestles with God. Here's the passage. The same night he arose and took his 2 wives, his 2 female servants, and his 11 children. He crossed the ford in the Jabbok, and he took them and sent them across the stream, and everything else that he had. And Jacob was left alone. And a man wrestled with him until the breaking of the day. When the man saw that he did not prevail against Jacob, he touched his hip socket, and Jacob's hip was put out of joint as he wrestled with him. Then the man said, "Let me go, for the day is broken." But Jacob said, "I will not let you go until you bless me." And the man said to him, "What is your name?" And he said, "Jacob." Then the man said, "Your name shall no longer be called Jacob, but Israel, for you have striven with God and with men and have prevailed." Then Jacob asked, "Please tell me your name." But the man said, "Why is it that you ask my name?" And there he blessed him. So Jacob called the name of the place Peniel, saying, "For I have seen God face to face, and yet my life has been delivered." The sun rose upon him as he passed Peniel, limping because of his hip. This is a great passage, and there's really a couple things in it that hit me that I think we can really apply to our lives today, and that's what I want to encourage you with. Number one is that Jacob was alone. We hate the word alone. We don't like loneliness. We are socially connected in every facet aspect of our life today. We work around people. We're in families around people. Even when we're alone, we are on social media connecting with people. So very rarely are we truly isolated. And what I see here is Jacob went to the place where he had nothing. He sent his family ahead of him. His camp was divided. He was alone. And that's where God met him. I started a practice a couple years ago of rising early and going on prayer walks. No dog, no headphones, no kids, no wife, just me and God. And I was going to walk, listen, pray, and have this kind of alone time with the hopes of an encounter with God. And it's been profound. God has shown up in powerful ways, and there's a ton of stories there, but it's something I truly believe in. You see it modeled in Scripture, where Jesus goes into the wilderness. Moses is in the wilderness. You've got Jacob here being isolated. The Apostle Paul goes into a season of being alone. Joseph goes to being alone. David is alone in caves. Look everywhere you want to in the Bible. God's people encounter him in the midst of their isolation, in the midst of their being alone. You got to go to the place where you have nothing to realize that God is everything you need, and that's the place where God shows up. That's a powerful place. So create margin in your life to be alone, because that's the place where you really can encounter God. Secondly, Jacob had wrestled with people his entire life. He had wrestled with his father for the blessing, his twin brother. He had wrestled with Laban for his daughters. He had wrestled. He was a schemer. He had strived. He was savvy, whatever you want to call it. He was shrewd. He was always trying to position himself, but wrestling with stuff. And he never wrestled with God. He half-heartedly trusted God. And you can see this because prior to, he prays to God, but then he divides his camp. He's not willing to trust God with his whole camp. He says, I will divide it, so that if I get conquered, this part will survive. He's trying to strive in his own mind as a way to protect what he has instead of truly letting go. And this is a powerful thing for us to see. Are you wrestling with the wrong things? Are you constantly trying to position things for fear of loss? Are you trying to position things to remain comfortable? Are you trying to control the circumstances because you're afraid of losing something and you're wrestling with the wrong stuff? Jacob shows us we have to wrestle with God. And it's incredible here because what happens is he wrestles with him all night, but God touches his hip socket. Immediately Jacob is lamed. But Jacob refuses to let him go and says, until you bless me. And what happens there is God gives Jacob a new name. And what this means to me is that until you are willing to wrestle with God, you will never know who you are. Until you're willing to wrestle with God, you'll never know who you are. You can try to define yourself by your career. You can try to define yourself by your accomplishments, your successes, your marriage, your kids, your status, your money, whatever it is. You can try to define yourself in all these ways. Where do you go to church? What do you do for a living? How many kids do you? Whatever it is, you define yourself by all of these different things instead of letting the one who created you define you. You know, we have an organization called YouPrint. It's a faith development organization, and we believe that God leaves his fingerprints on the world through yours. We all have a thumbprint, but in order to find out your thumbprint, your identity, you got to wrestle with him. You got to go to that place where you have nothing. You got to be isolated. You got to be alone. You got to be willing to wrestle with God, the right thing, so that he can show you who you are. And when you have that, it's the end of you and the beginning of what he would have for you. Jacob has come to the end of himself. I'm tired of wrestling with everything else. I'm tired of fighting. I'm tired of striving. I'm not letting you go until you bless me. What's crazy here is in the Old Testament, seeing God face to face meant death. And so Jacob said, I ain't letting you go. I'm willing to die because I want what you have. I want you to bless me. And that's something that's profound and powerful for us to consider in our culture today. Are you willing to wrestle with God to that point? To the point of death. Say, I got nothing. I'm wrestling with you, man, and I'm not letting go until you bless me. And God will, in that moment, as he did Jacob, give you a new name. This new name thing is really powerful. You look at Abram in the Old Testament, renamed Abraham. You look at Jacob, renamed Israel. You know, you see this in the New Testament with Saul, renamed Paul. You know, God has a way of tearing the facade off of your old self and giving you a new life that nobody else or nothing else can. The Apostle Paul said, you know, I am crucified with Christ, yet it is no longer I who live, but Christ in me. The life I live by faith in the Son of God. You know, it's this, I am a living sacrifice now. The old has gone, the new has come. There's this language of renewal. When you wrestle with God, you're given your identity. And until then, you'll never know who you are because you're looking for it everywhere else. And the final thing that hits me in this passage is the idea that Jacob left with a limp. This is powerful, and I was listening to Tim Keller preach on this, and he referenced Dr. Martin Lloyd. Gosh, I'm drawing a blank. I think that Martin Lloyd Jones, an old pastor in England at the turn of the century. But anyway, he said that when you encounter God, you're going to leave with a limp. The power of God is so profound, it's so overwhelming that you cannot help but be humbled. You see this throughout history, right? You see this throughout God's story, is those who encounter God in a powerful way are lamed. And maybe it's a circumstance, maybe it's a situation. You have it here with Jacob. You have Joseph in prison who carries this. You have David, the murderer, adulterer. You have, Peter in his denial of Christ. You have Paul and his thorn. And you even have Jesus with nail scars in his hands. Touch and see. I've encountered God in a profound way, and I've been humbled beyond understanding, and I walk with a limp, but I am joyful because I know who I am, because he's that good. We fear pain and struggle and adversity, and we fear the limp, and so we don't wrestle with God because we don't want a limp. But Jesus said, take up your cross and follow me. And yet in Christian culture today, we want to go and worship him on Sundays and lay our cross down Monday through Saturday. And this is a call for us to pick up our cross and follow him, to wrestle with God to the point of being lamed so that God might bless us. And in my own life, for those of you who might know my story, is I was diagnosed with spreading malignant melanoma. It's one of many what I would call limps in my life. It's a struggle I've had ongoing. The anxiety about cancer returning, you name it, a laundry list of things that God has used to purify me and draw me to him. But I have a 4-inch scar on my side where all the tissue was removed around this metastasizing cancer. And it's part of my limp. It's the laming for me. It's the reminder of God's faithfulness. It's the place of humility where I realize that God doesn't need me, and that in a moment life can be over, and that it's a gift, it's a blessing. So I have to choose to live it accordingly. And it's one of those things that God uses as a way to remind me to be humble, because God doesn't need me. He loves me. And how much greater is it to be loved than to be needed? You see, we live life going through like we think God needs us. He says, I don't need you, I love you. I want you to wrestle with me so I can give you a new name. And you'll walk away humbled, but you'll walk away absolutely joyful and free because you know who you are. And that's a wonderful thing. So I just encourage you guys in your own life to get to be alone, to go to the place where you have nothing so God can show you who you really are. And to wrestle with the right things, to wrestle with God. Because in that wrestling, he will show you who you are. It's the new identity. And you might walk away with a limp, but it is absolutely worth every second of it. If you guys want more, you can check out our organization called Uprint, YOUPRINT.LIFE. That's our website. We have some courses, some resources, some one-to-one mentoring, speaking opportunities, things like that. But I just encourage you guys to press into this. Use Jacob as a picture of your own life, and are you willing to go to that place where you wrestle with God, where you absolutely let go of everything, wrestle with Him, and watch. God will bless you there. You guys have a fantastic night.